You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
For the community, by the community.
What I wake up with every night and what I go to sleep with every night is knowing that there's 400 people that are going to die today, and 400 tomorrow, and 400 the next day. And what I live with is knowing that we have the answers to cut that in half if we just implement what we know. The person that joins us will allow us to save another life faster. Someone else's son, daughter, brother, or sister. And there's such satisfaction in doing that.
Meet Gary Mendell, former chairman of HEI Hotels and Resorts, a company worth over $1 billion in revenues. You've heard of the Starwood, the Marriott, the Westin, the Sheraton. In 2011, Gary's life changed. He changed his life. His son, Brian, took his own life. And as a result of that, Gary stepped down as chairman and founded a new nonprofit organization called Shatterproof, devoted to ending the stigma and shame of drug addiction. This is Gary's story. My name is Pat Kazikoff. You're watching Shalom Hartford. Stay with me, and we're going to meet this man, Gary Mendell. You graduated Cornell and Wharton, and your first job was around here in Hartford.
Yeah, actually, my first job was when I graduated Cornell. I was an assistant manager here at the Ponderosa here on Prospect Avenue. That was my first job out of college. From there, it grew to overseeing one restaurant. I think it was the Ponderosa in Manchester, and then it grew to overseeing the 6 restaurants in the Connecticut area.
So how did we get from managing Ponderosa to buying your first hotel, which I understand was a Marriott hotel?
Correct.
At the age of 26?
Correct.
How does that happen?
My brother and I always wanted to be in business together. My dad owned a restaurant. We always had visions of taking that one restaurant and expanding it. He came home that Thanksgiving when I was 26, and we decided it was time to start our own business. He was a couple years younger than me, and he was working as an analyst for a hotel company. And we decided it was time. And it was a question of, do we expand restaurants or do we try something in the hotel business? Hotels seemed bigger, more interesting, so we decided hotels. And then we started in my basement. We started looking for our first hotel investment.
And you picked the Marriott? Isn't that a little bit big?
It was big. It was big, but we knew that being as young as we were, it wasn't about us. It was about the hotel. That was going to be the key ingredient.
So the key ingredient was the branding.
The branding and the location of the hotel. And we knew that this hotel in this location would do really well. And
you were able to sell that concept to investors?
Yeah, essentially we took out the yellow pages and we cold called every investment advisor within a 30-mile radius of the hotel, and we had structured it what it would look like as an investment. It wasn't about us. It was about, here's the projection of the numbers. We know this is a good location, sitting at so many companies in the area, great brand, great hotel. And we found investors to come in over a 3-month period to provide the equity to buy this hotel.
When you look back at it, did people laugh at you?
Some.
I mean,
many.
They had to.
Many.
You're 26 years old, although right. You and your brother had a hotel background.
A couple years as an analyst.
That's it.
That's it.
So what in your background allowed you to think at that level? Is there something, like you said, your father had a restaurant, but you thought like that? Most people don't think like that. You were thinking very big.
Yeah, I
How much was that first hotel?
It was $30 million.
$30 million.
Right.
And so you got 80 investors?
It was 80 investors at $100,000 each, which is $8 million of equity. With the mortgage, we were able to buy that hotel. And I don't know the answer to that question. We just felt like we could do it.
Well, Can you look back in your background? You said your father owned his own restaurant. It was a big restaurant?
No, it was a small restaurant.
Small restaurant.
Right.
But is there anything that you can say in your background that prepared you for this type of visionary thinking?
There's really nothing I can think of. I can think of there's two pieces of it. It's visionary, you could say, but it's also entrepreneurial, taking risks, starting small, really, in a basement. And that we got from my father. I mean, my father owned one restaurant, and we watched him growing up on the phone every night at 11 o'clock. What were sales? Going in every morning, taking the cash and depositing it in the bank. Working 7 days a week. We just got that from my father.
So that's basically a grassroots philosophy of life.
Correct. I think it was less visionary and more grassroots.
So why do some people add the visionary piece? I mean, could you bring words to that? They bring a visionary piece to it where you're talking about it and you're deleting the visionary piece. What you're saying is it's just work. Just basic work.
Correct. It's starting from a basement, which is where we started, with no money, and finding ways to get things done. Working 18-hour days, 7 days a week to make it happen. And we had two $20 desks, and that's it. We made it happen.
I find it interesting that even now at this age, at this senior age, that it's difficult to bring words as to what made you entrepreneurial.
It's interesting. I think it was watching my father.
Okay.
How he did it.
Sense.
Yeah,
That
probably.
makes sense. And then you had two children.
Correct.
You had Brian.
Right.
And
Greg.
Greg.
Right.
And Brian,
Right.
as a young man, we know what his ending was and that he took his life.
Right.
But as a young man, could you have foreseen anything? As a young boy?
No, he was the best. He was funny, really verbal, talking sentences at 9 months, just very verbal, very playful, very loving, always with that big smile of his. He was just wonderful, wonderful kid, just very funny, just very loving.
Drug addiction is a major problem in America. And there are about 25 million people a year who...
25 million people addicted. Right now, all the time, there's 25 million people addicted. There's about 400 people that die every single day in the United States related to alcohol or the misuse of drugs.
Of all the people who try drugs, and there's a lot of those,
Right.
supposedly only 10% of those become drug addicts?
Correct. But that's a large, you say only, I would reverse that and say 10%. That's a big number.
Is there anything that binds these 10% of people, that there's parallels in those 10%?
Sure.
What are the parallels?
Well, there's science behind this now, and the science defines risk factors and protective factors. So what are the risk factors? Someone with anxiety, someone with depression, someone genetically prone to addiction, the age of first use, huge risk factor. Someone trying drugs trying their first hit of pot or their first beer at age 13 or 14 or 15 is 6 times more likely to become addicted than someone tries it at the first time at age 21.
And so what about Brian? Did he have any of those risk
Looking
factors?
back, he had a lot of them. He had some social anxiety. Even though he was very verbal, his hands were a little sweaty. And looking back, I think he was anxious.
Did you know at the time? That
No, we never thought about it that way. But looking back, we think the sweaty palms could have been some anxiety. He was not depressed, so he didn't have any depression growing up. But we know he had his first beer when he was 13. If he had his first beer when he was 17 versus 13, it could have been the difference. He had ADD. That's a risk factor.
Why is that a risk factor?
They don't know yet why. They think, because I'm going to say they meaning the scientists, the researchers, they think because for the same reason that our frontal lobe is not fully formed until age 22 or 23, and that's why age of first use is a risk factor, they think that it's less formed with someone with ADD as well, but they don't know why.
What about his friends? Was he in a fast group? Was he...
No, his great group of friends. And I particularly moved to a neighborhood where I knew there were a bunch of kids his age, all great kids. and they're all doing well today.
What about genetically? Is there some genetic factor that binds people?
Absolutely.
With addiction?
Genetic is half of it. So literally half of those, the risk factor of becoming addicted, half of that is related to genetics.
So did you have that in your family also?
You know, I didn't think about it when Brian was growing up. After he passed away, I thought about it because it wasn't right with us. But my grandfather, who I'd only seen a few times, was addicted to alcohol. But I'd only seen him probably 10 times in my life.
He wasn't a big factor, an
Correct.
influencing factor.
And I never saw him drinking around me. He wasn't. I heard from my mother that he had alcoholic problems, but I never saw it. So I never saw addiction.
Right.
It was never part of my life.
So when Brian was 13 and he was starting to
Right. Experiment.
Experiment, we
Which
call it.
like most kids, the year before high school, they try their first beer, their first glass of wine, their first hit of pot.
Did you know that he was experimenting at that time?
No.
When did you finally know?
A year later, his first year in high school, he was caught smoking pot. But I had the issue that most parents my age have, which is when I grew up, a lot of us drank beer in high school. Many of us tried pot in college, some earlier. I tried it in college. I didn't know anybody that became addicted or had issues. I mean, it wasn't that prevalent then. Marijuana today, which I think is very important to know, is very, very different than the marijuana than when I grew up. It's 4 times as powerful, 4 to 5 times as powerful. Not 40%, 4 to 5 times. It's a totally different drug, and it's destroying kids' lives today.
Now that you know
Yes.
what you know,
Yes.
and kids are starting marijuana use and alcohol use much, much earlier.
Yes.
What would you tell the parents? Because from your perspective during your era,
Correct. Here's what I would tell the parents.
yeah, what would you tell the parents?
First of all, I would say that just to go back to the risk factors, a lot of it is just random. For every 6 people that smoke cigarettes, only 1 develops lung cancer. They don't know exactly why yet. I just listed some risk factors. Just because you have a child who's doesn't have anxiety, doesn't have ADD, not genetic, doesn't mean they won't become addicted. So if I was a parent today, yes, those risk factors matter. But I would do everything I can in answer to your question to make sure that my child did not touch alcohol or marijuana or a prescription pill until they were at least 18 years old.
So you're a parent and you have a 13-year-old kid.
Right.
And a parent tells you, your kid is smoking dope,
Right.
and your kid is having a beer. What would you do?
I would, depends on the child, so you can't say exactly. I would start with something like sitting down with the child and letting them know that there's pluses and minuses of me as a father. I'll take you to the ball games, you've got this, I'm a little grouchy here, but this thing is unbending. You are not gonna touch marijuana, prescription pills, or alcohol until you're at least 18 years old. Not happening. And I'm gonna drug test you regularly to make sure you're not. I'm sitting down with the parents of all your friends, and we're all gonna make a pact that we're gonna tell each other. I'm talking to your teachers. I'm gonna make a pact that if they suspect anything, they're gonna call me. It's just not happening.
So how do you feel now that you're taking a look and seeing what's going on in the newspapers? They're legalizing marijuana.
Correct.
They legalized it in California.
Right.
They legalized it in Colorado. They have stores.
Right.
I mean, it's out in the open. How does someone like you feel about that?
I feel obviously horrible about that because what's going on there is there's annual surveys, and what the surveys show is that perception of risk is among teens for marijuana is much lower today than it was 3 years ago. And when the perception of risk goes down, intuitively and empirically, use goes up. So marijuana use is much higher today than it was 3 years ago because of that. And that is really harmful.
So
do you know that
What can we do?
Well, we as
because the legislators are going against you in this particular field.
Absolutely. In several states they are. I would probably pivot this conversation a little bit to talk about prescription pills, because that is more of an issue today than it's a dramatically worse issue today than marijuana is. I don't want to go away from marijuana because I would do everything like I just said to not have my children smoke marijuana. The amount of prescription pills in this country being prescribed by doctors has gone up 4 times, not 40%, 4 times in the last 15 years. In 2012, prescribers, the healthcare system in this industry, prescribed enough pills in this country to give every adult in this country a bottle of pills for a month. Think about that. 4 times. And guess what's gone up 5 times in the last 15 years? 4 times the amount of pills being prescribed, 5 times the number of people dying related to an overdose of an opiate, either prescription pills or heroin. 5 times. They're directly correlated. Emergency room visits, ambulance calls, pills being prescribed, deaths. And there are common sense, scientifically researched, proven methods to reduce it, and we as a country are not doing it.
Well, so we as a country are not, but you are doing something. You are the person who founded Shatterproof.
Correct.
And basically the purpose of that organization is to end the stigma and eliminate the shame that goes with drug addiction.
Correct.
Wow. That's a big deal.
It's a big vision, but a vision that's been achieved by others.
Why didn't you just join an organization like Partnership for a Drug-Free America?
Right.
Why didn't you do that? Why did you decide to start an organization?
I actually looked at Partnership for Drug-Free. At that time it was America, now it's Drug-Free Kids. I met with them several times. Great people, very passionate people, cared about what they were doing, but I had a vision that I thought that I could make larger impact faster than joining their board.
Well, part of what your organization does, Shatterproof, is that you have rappelling events.
Right.
Which are unusual. I mean,
Right.
nobody has rappelling events. They
Right.
have walks.
Right.
They have the walk for cancer. They have bike rides.
Right.
Why did you choose rappelling?
The largest event for every one of the major charities is a walk. Susan Komen, Race for the Cure, it's a walk. Heart Walk. Relay for Life, it's essentially a walk/run. They reach the broadest audiences. Bike MS, broad audience. We will move into something that has a broader audience down the road. But to launch the organization with a small budget, and we wanted to get attention out there, we knew that a walk would not bring in the media, but we knew that rappelling would.
And did it?
It absolutely has. Wherever we go, the local affiliates of ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC, they're all there at every event. It's bringing attention to what we're doing.
So maybe we'll be there.
You will be there. No, maybe. You will be there.
Okay, we will be there.
You will be there.
Right.
It's bringing attention. We're doing an event in 3 weeks at the largest hotel conference in the country out in LA. And there'll be 3,000 people at that conference. 200 of those will be rappelling, with probably the other 2,800 watching. We're going to raise $1 million over 2 days. But as important as the $1 million that we're going to raise and the people participating, it's the people participating and all the messaging that goes around it. The 200 people that will be rappelling will be sending tens of thousands of emails out, impressions on Facebook, telling everybody what they're doing, asking them to donate to them because they're rappelling. And the messages are all going to be the same. Addiction is a disease.
I'm seeing a parallel with the way you're structuring this organization to the way you started your business.
Absolutely.
You started it with big impact. You bought the Marriott at 26. Here you have a rappelling event. The difference in the business is that you can measure, well, maybe it's not a difference, you tell me. You can measure your successes in business. It's it's monetary.
Right.
How are you going to measure the successes in Shatterproof?
Sure. Let's look at the short-term goals. Number of lives saved, which is both short-term and long-term. We've just influenced legislation being passed in 6 states in the last 18 months. That legislation, we can look, first of all, we can see we passed the legislation. we can show studies that this legislation will save X number of lives.
Is this the legislation on naloxone? Is that the one?
Naloxone, Good Samaritan law, mandating that prescribers are educated about the misuse of prescription pills and how to properly prescribe them, and mandating that doctors use their database to understand prescribing history before they make a prescription. I mean, I could tell you some numbers that are shocking.
But you can measure that?
Absolutely.
At the end of the year, you can say that X number of people died less than the year before because of this legislation.
Yes, and you can also, even more accurately with the medication naloxone, you could say exactly how many lives were saved. Someone was lying on the ground, they were administered naloxone, and they woke up and they lived. We can know exactly the number of lives that were saved by that.
What about the biggest concept of Shatterproof
Right.
is eliminating the stigma and the shame,
Right.
which is basically changing the paradigm of a disease.
Correct.
As I remember when somebody had cancer, he has cancer.
Right.
They were whispering.
You can measure that by surveys. So we will do a survey. There was already a survey done several years ago, but we're going to do our own survey at the end of this year as a baseline. And then we can redo that survey every year to check American attitudes of how they view this disease.
So this
Can be measured.
This Shatterproof is a long-term venture for Gary Mendell.
This is the rest of my life.
So how do you
And
feel
beyond.
about, you changed your life completely?
It's a story. It's an answer of two answers. My insides are destroyed. It'll never be the same. But there's a part of my insides and the outside that I'm just getting inspired by every day by so many people I meet that are so wonderful. People in the hotel industry who have supported Shatterproof in so many different ways. People in all industries who I've met, people like yourself, people from all over the country. There's almost 100,000 people right now within Shatterproof in some way, as donors, supporters, volunteers, participants, advocates in states. Wonderful people that could be sitting here just like me right now telling a story, many of them, of tragedy in their family. And they're all helping in all their different ways. And it's just, every time I get off the phone with somebody or meet with somebody, I'm just uplifted. My heart warms in the generosity of so many people.
So you feel differently when you ran the business than when you're running Shatterproof? Is there a different feeling?
In both businesses or organizations, I enjoy the people.
Well,
I miss the people of my hotel, within my hotel business. I miss the people a lot because I don't have the interaction with them that I used to. But I'm really, really enjoying much more saving lives versus making money. I don't know how I ever lived a life making money before because I can't imagine doing it after doing this. Waking up every day and the sole goal is to find smarter and better and more efficient ways to scale this and save more lives quicker is just a blessing.
I'm seeing parallels between the hotel business
Right.
and Shatterproof. The hotel business is a people business.
Right.
It's full of people from the bottom to the top. The hotel business, you were building. You started with one hotel, then you sold a bunch of hotels to Starwood.
Right. About 25 at that time.
Are you using the same technical skill for both?
Yes, absolutely. Although building the hotel company, I was learning from scratch. Now I've taken what I learned building a business and applying it here.
Well, it's good that the
Right.
hotel business happened before
Absolutely.
Shatterproof.
Absolutely.
Because you might not have been able to do what you're doing with Shatterproof had you not had the hotel business to start.
You're so right. You're so right.
Is there any message that you want to send?
What I wake up with every night and what I go to sleep with every night is knowing that there's 400 people that are going to die today, and 400 tomorrow, and 400 the next day. And what I live with is knowing that we have the answers to cut that in half if we just implement what we know. And we could chip away at it. We've only been around 2 years, and we're going into our 3rd year, and we're going like that. Every person that joins us can help us grow that faster. And there's such satisfaction in doing that. So I encourage anyone that is hearing this, that wants to join us in some way that works for them. Every person that joins us will allow us to save another life faster. Someone else's son, daughter, brother, or sister.
We've been talking to Gary Mendell. He's building an organization, Shatterproof. It's handling a very, very big disease in this country. As he said, we have the answers to this disease, but we're not implementing them yet. I'm Pat Kazakov. Thank you, Gary Mendell.
Thank you.
خودی نشه